Mr. Sean Harvell, licensed funeral director at McCall's Bronxwood Funeral Home in Bronx, New York. And first of all, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Harvell.
No problem.
Now, let me ask you first question. Is your license in 2 states, right?
Right.
New York and New Jersey. So
right.
you're a double licensed funeral director. What made you want to get involved with the whole funeral industry in the first place?
Well, when I was younger, I was into wrestling, and my favorite wrestler was The Undertaker. And what I found out when I was doing my research with The Undertaker, and his manager was the pallbearer. He used to come down with the urn. And when I did research on The Undertaker, I found out that the pallbearer, and his name was William Moody, he was actually a licensed funeral director in Alabama. So he was a real funeral director. So that kind of sparked my interest into this whole funeral service industry.
Wow, that's got to be a first for me. I ain't never heard that before. I used to watch Undertaker too on the wrestling. That's where I'm with Hulk Hogan and all the stuff with the Undertaker. So that's what got you started.
That's what got me started.
And it took you to a point where now you have a license in New York and New Jersey.
Right.
Right. Wow. So let me ask you a question. You know, being a funeral director, what do you enjoy about being a funeral director?
I enjoy being able to be there for the families in their hour of bereavement. Pretty much relieving the stress and the pressures of what do we have to do, you know, and being able to guide them through the process, and, you know, just relieving that burden, you know, because they already have to go through the grief process. And there's nothing like having a family to come into a funeral home and get agitated because they're not getting that level of service that will, you know, kind of bear that burden of the whole funeral service aspect.
Yeah, I definitely understand it, because even in what we do, we realize it's the lowest point of many people's lives. I remember for myself when my mom passed, which was 16 years ago now. It was just a totally new experience for us, and it was like, you know, I never had someone that was that close to me pass, and it was like, you know, what do we do? So even that goes into the next question. You know, can you help? We have a lot of families that are watching. What should be the first steps that a family should do once they hear, you know, they get that call, or they hear from the doctor or what have you, that your loved one has passed away? What should be the steps that they should take at that immediate moment?
Well, a lot of times when a family gets the news, or if they're even present when their loved one passes away, the first thing they do is they will call the funeral home and, you know, of course, contact the funeral home to come and pick their loved one up, or whatever the case may be. But then they ultimately think that the next step is coming right into the funeral home, when it's really not the next step. What they should do is get with their loved ones who all are a part of the arrangement process, and get the biographical information, which is the information that will appear on the death certificate, all the vitals. Also determine whether they want to cremate, whether they want to bury, and where. Because a lot of times when the family come in, you know, right after a death, they haven't really considered any of those things. And so now when you're sitting with them, and then, you know, you're going over the final arrangement, once you get to the cemetery or even the church, you know, and it's, well, you know, I haven't contacted the church, or I haven't contacted the pastor, or I haven't contacted the cemetery because I don't really know, you know, where my loved one was buried, or I need to do some more research. And so what happens is that it kind of stalls the arrangement for a whole nother day, because they have to get that information as far as the availability of the church, and then the cemetery aspect, knowing where they want to bury, how far they want to go out. You know? Okay.
And I know something that can help in that area is pre-need.
Yes.
Because, you know, and I want you to explain to our, you know, families that are watching here a little bit about how pre-need works, and really the benefits of doing a pre-need, having pre-needs done.
Right. With pre-need, how I approach families with pre-needs, because a lot of our families think that if we talk about this or we plan this ahead of time, it's going to happen.
I understand what you're saying.
And that's totally not true. Okay. With pre-need, it allows you the benefit of coming in and selecting services and merchandise that you would want for yourself. Because a lot of times when you're sitting with their loved ones, the surviving loved ones, they don't know what you want. And so what happens is that they're trying to figure out, well, would the person like this or would they like that? And ultimately their wishes become our wishes. You know, so the funeral really won't reflect them. It will reflect what we want versus what they would want. And so the benefit of that is you coming in and you selecting a ceremony and a celebration of life that you would want, you know. I may not want prayer cards with my picture on it, but my family may not know that. You know, a lot of times I have a hard time trying to figure out what to get my relatives for their birthday. So I know that I will have a hard time trying to figure out what they would want for their services.
Homegrown, so yes.
So the benefit of that is, of course, number one is you get to choose the type of service you want. Number two, it makes it easier on your family when they come in because it's already here. Everything is there. And I noticed that when it's done and you get the families to come in and it's a relief off of them. You know, it's, well, our mother or our father came in and they pre-planned it and we're just here to going through the motion.
Yeah, they already set it up.
And it's already set up, so we don't have to figure out, you know, whether we should have everything all in one day or whether we should have a viewing the day prior to service and burial. And, you know, also it allows you to pre-fund, you know, this funeral rite.
Okay. So wait, talk about that. So you can actually prepay for the funeral, and how does that work? The financial aspect of it.
The financial aspect of it is when you come into a funeral home. Of course, New York, New Jersey are very different. I practice now mainly in New York, and how the families do, the consumer, when they come into pre-funded, they can start that pre-arranged off. Generally, our pre-arranged, because we use New York State pre-plan, they would come in, they would start off with $500. And they can pay as often and as much as they want. So there's not a times aspect or a time constraint that they have to pay, and there's not a specific dollar amount that they have to pay after they started off. So they can pay as much as they want, and that money goes into the New York State Pre-Plan Trust, and it occurs interest, of course. So, you know, by the time the person, I notice a lot of times that, you know, by the time they pass away, any type of inflation with the cemetery or service and merchandise wise, it usually offsets with that interest once they pay it off.
Okay.
But it allows a lot of flexibility, you know, because, you know, we have to educate, you know, our relatives on an important aspect of insurance. But a lot of people may not be able to get insurance. Okay. So this is a good way for them to pre-fund their funeral service.
And they're getting it at almost, you can say, as a discounted rate, because getting it at the rate today, let's say 2016, and they may not pass until 2040, 2050, whatever the year it is.
Right, and then you have this money that's already in this account that's bearing interest for your funeral service.
For the funeral service. Okay. So now let me ask you a question. That money that's there, and I don't know how often this comes up, but is it locked that, okay, I went to this funeral home and I've pre-planned with them now, but I've you know, my loved one has passed, it's been many years later, and now McCall's Bronxwood, for example, is doing beautiful service. I want to bring my loved one to them. Can they switch from the funeral home they were originally with? Or?
Absolutely. Pre-arrangements, they are transferable. So if, you know, you made pre-arrangements for your mother and you were living in the Bronx, New York, and you retire and you going to Florida and you're packing mom up and you're taking her with you, those pre-arrangements are transferable to any funeral home that you choose. You may decide to stay in the Bronx, and you may decide that you want to go to another funeral home, and it's not a problem. You can go to that other funeral home, let them know that I made pre-arrangements, you know, at another firm, and they'll say okay, and they'll either call us up or, you know, they'll submit their paperwork into the pre-need trust, and then that funeral home will be able to get those funds to pay off the funeral. So that's not a problem.
Okay, so that's great. It's not locked in. I mean, they still have some flexibility with that.
Right.
Now let's go even into the financial aspects. I know this is an important decision that families make in regards to funerals. You know, how can families kind of deal with the financial aspect of the funeral cost in regards to what are some options that they might have to bring the costs down? Because I know that's something that's on the minds of most families when they come in there. Right. You know, the funerals cost so much money. How can they, you know, maybe work around that?
With that, each funeral home has a general price list, and that general price list pretty much lets you know what they charge for their services. And of course, that charge can change from funeral home A to funeral home B to funeral home C. But what families have to bear in mind is the funeral home is not going to push any merchandise or services on you. So when you go into the funeral home and you let them know that, listen, I don't have a whole lot of money. I'm just here to get my loved one buried. They're not going to push any type of high level of services on you. You know, they're going to give you what you need as far as to get to that point.
Now I'm going to interrupt you for a second, because you could talk from McCall's Bronxwood, right?
Right.
But there are funeral homes, and I'm aware of some that, you know, they do.
Right.
So you could talk for yourself and McCall's Bronxwood and your.
Right. So let me go back. Well, I have a few colleagues who I can say.
Okay, so the majority of them are good.
The majority of them are very good, very straightforward when it comes with the family. And like I said, you're right, I can speak from McCall's Bronxwood. But when we come in, we take into consideration, because, you know, people don't have it, you know, and you can't get anything a person doesn't have. And so when we're in the arrangement conference, you know, if a family expressed that hardship, we do what we can to work with them to give them a level of service, you know, that they can afford, and also conducting that service with dignity and respect.
Yeah, okay. Now, another question, just going off of that too, is, you know, each family is unique, just like each loved one is unique. You know, how do you go about, you know, customizing a service for the particular life that was lived?
Well, that's a good question. At McCall's Bronxwood, we do a lot of personalizations and customizations with funeral services. Family come in and we pretty much interview the family. We interview the family. We ask them a lot of questions about their loved one, from their hobbies, you know, what they like to do, what kind of job that they have, because we kind of tie that in to the homegoing celebration. And that way we get the families to not pretty much focus on the death of their loved one, but focus on the life of their loved one. And it really helps them in the grieving process, because it gives them a different experience. And what we find out is that we get a lot of repeat families, or families who have been to a celebration like that and said, well, we saw what you did for, let's use a name, Miss Smith, and we want something along that same line, because when we went there, it was not like a regular funeral, you know, but it was like a homegoing celebration, and you had items that reflected her life. And
give some examples, like what?
We had a guy who liked to fish. You know, he was avid fisher. You know, that was his thing. And so we came in and we transformed the whole chapel, and it looked like we were at the river, at the lake, and we had the fishing poles up, and we had some of his pictures all about the funeral home with the fishing nets, and we had little makeshift fish we put on the net, and also we do a DVD and it showed him, you know, fishing and all of that. We did that. We also had a family who lost multiple loved ones, and they were part of a basketball team. So when you walked into the funeral home, we actually had the basketball jerseys hanging as you walked throughout the whole funeral home. Then we had big old basketball nets up and basketballs throughout the funeral home. And so, you know, it kind of, you know, you reflected the life of that person, you know.
So how do families respond to it? You know, the members that come to the services, how do they respond to these kind of?
It's great, because as you watch the individuals walk in, when you watch family and friends walk in, their eyes kind of jump out, because, you know, they're not expecting, you know, a setup and a presentation like that. And it's like, oh, wow, you know, I never seen it. And they'll tell you, well, I never seen something like this before. You know, I haven't experienced, you know, a service like this before, you know, where the family, you know, pretty much we transformed the funeral home into, you know, whatever hobby or whatever, you know, interest the person had. We pretty much transferred the funeral home into that. You know, as you're walking in, you'll see pictures, and, you know, before you even get to the chapel that the person is, you know, laid out in. So it's an eye opener for them.
So is that kind of service available to, you know, whether someone is doing a full burial or a lot of people do direct cremation things now.
That service of burial, that service is available to anyone, whether you're doing a direct cremation with a memorial service or whether you're having a full traditional funeral. And speaking of cremation, a lot of our funeral directors have not grasped that even though a family comes in to choose cremation, they don't really necessarily want a direct cremation with nothing. But they come to us as funeral service professionals to guide them, to let them know that, okay, you want a direct cremation. Okay, well, would you like any type of memorial service or any type of service that will reflect the life of your loved one? And then that gets the conversation started to, well, yeah, but I didn't know I can have that, So it's up to us as funeral service professionals to direct the family and guide them, to let them know what their options are. You can choose cremation. You can choose cremation and still have a viewing and a funeral, and a lot of times they don't know that.
Yeah. Well, you have all the years of experience, so you can advise the family in the best way about it.
Right.
And that's why it's important to come to a funeral professional like yourself. So let me ask you this last question. I thank you very much for joining us today. Over the years that you've been a funeral director, licensed in both states, tell me, what have you learned as far as your interaction with families? And this kind of just I'm just throwing a question at you. What have you learned over your and you've been licensed for how many years, you said?
I've been licensed 12 years.
12 years, okay. 12 years. So you've been licensed for 12 years. What have you learned over the course of your 12 years of being a licensed director?
I've learned, one of the most important things I've learned over these years is you have to really listen to what's not being said. Okay? When a family comes, they will tell you, they will express to you a lot of things, but a lot of things they won't express, and you have to listen to that. And also that each family is unique in their own way, and you have to deal with them in their own unique way. You can't come into the arrangement with your cookie cutter idea of what this family is going to want. So you have to come in with just a blank mindset and say, you know what, this family, I want to listen to what they're going to tell me, and based upon that, that's how we're going to come up with the blueprint of what their service is going to be like.
Yeah, so listening, and I think that's a wonderful thing to learn, how to listen to people, to hear what they want and give them what they want by listening to them. And hopefully you guys were listening to what Mr. Harvell was saying today, and it's been a benefit to you. So Mr. Sean Harvell of McCall's Bronxwood Funeral Home in Bronx, New York. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next interview.